This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict with me, Jake Hanrahan. In this episode, we're speaking to journalist Henry Wilkins about the recent military coup in the African country of Burkina Faso and what a conflict there might mean for the surrounding regions. We talk about Russia, the military, vigilantes, the tribal animist militias, all sorts. This is a region that very rarely gets enough coverage, but it's very interesting either way. Remember, here at Popular Front, we are completely independent, grassroots. If you like what we're doing and you want extra content, please support us at patreon.com/popularfront. So January 23rd, there was this military coup in Burkina Faso. Maybe just take us through that. What actually happened? What led up to this? You know, why did it happen?
So, 23rd was a Sunday. Woke up in the morning to hear that there had been reports overnight of gunfire at the largest military base in Ouagadougou, which is the capital of Burkina Faso. Yeah, so went down there. The military had taken over the entire base. Basically, myself and another journalist went down there. We could hear gunfire coming from inside the base initially, and we thought perhaps there were gunfights going on inside between troops that were loyal to the government and troops that were mutinying, basically. So we tried to get a little bit closer. We went up to an overpass next to the base, which sort of gave a bit of a view of what was going on, and did some filming from there. Then we were actually stopped by some of the mutineers who fired warning shots in the air, took our camera equipment and so on, and actually took us inside the base, detained us for about half an hour, took us inside the base where the mutiny had started. And initially we were thinking obviously that we were being taken hostage, or we're going to be detained for a lot longer than we were, but it turned out the mutineers were media savvy enough to put one of their spokespeople on the phone to us and give us a list of their demands, what they wanted to see from the government. Now, these demands, they included more soldiers to help fight the war between armed groups linked to Islamic State and Al Qaeda in the north and east of the country, especially better equipment, better treatment of colleagues families of colleagues who died in the war as well. In many ways, sort of fairly reasonable demands. And then they released us with these demands to go and broadcast. And then this was on the Sunday. It wasn't Saturday. It wasn't really until the Monday that the coup makers managed to actually take power. So they were initially, people were thinking it was just a mutiny, and it perhaps wasn't a full-on coup. But then throughout the night, between the Sunday and the Monday, the mutinous soldiers they locked down the area around the presidential palace, and went in search of the President Roch Kabore, who was ousted in the coup. So they were apparently looking for him all night. There were helicopters circling around the area of the presidential palace. Myself and another journalist managed to get into that area and sort of see what was going on. This special forces unit called Cobra Unit, which played a big part in actually carrying out the coup, had sort of set up checkpoints on various roads around the presidential palace and so on. And they attacked what they thought was the president's armoured vehicles as well. The next day, in the morning, vehicles were found sort of shot up with with blood on the seats and so on. As it turned out, the president wasn't in the convoy. We don't think it was, but at least 4 of his presidential guards were injured in that attack. So by Monday we woke up and found that the military had taken control of the state broadcaster, RTB, and we were throughout the day really expecting there to be the kind of cliched announcement on national television where a guy in fatigues kind of comes on TV and and announces that the military has taken power, and that didn't in the evening actually, which was the point where the coup was sort of signed, sealed, and delivered, as it were. So yeah, really, in the short term, it really unfolded over 2 days. But once the military had taken power, they didn't really come up against any resistance. So yeah, anyway, that was kind of what happened with the coup itself. Going back a little bit, I think we can see the beginnings of this coup kind of 6 years back. When Burkina Faso's war with armed groups linked to Islamic State and Al Qaeda started. So there's been a conflict in Mali, which is just north of Burkina Faso borders, on Burkina Faso's northern border, for a decade now, and there's been an Islamist insurgency there, but until sort of late 2015, early 2016, that conflict, it never spilled over the border into Burkina Faso. So the change that sort of made the conflict spread from Mali into Burkina Faso was the fact that there was actually a popular uprising in 2014 in Burkina Faso, which saw the former military dictator of Burkina Faso, Blaise Compaoré, thrown out of power. He'd been in power for 27 years. And with that came a transition period of a year. And then there were properly democratic elections for the first time in Burkina Faso's history since independence, back in the 60s. And so there was the first democratic president in Burkina Faso, was elected, Roch Kaboré. But unfortunately, as the first the military dictator was thrown out, this Blaise Compaoré, the former dictator, he had a well-documented non-aggression pact with the terrorist groups that were operating over the border in Mali, whereby the terror groups who were fighting their war against the Malian government would basically come over the border into Burkina Faso for R&R, rest and recuperation. They'd be given safe haven in Burkina Faso so they could take a break from the fighting, and in return they agreed not to carry out attacks within Burkina Faso's borders. So the former dictator, although not democratic, obviously he did have this very developed kind of security apparatus and these relationships with the armed groups that were operating in the over the border in Mali, which just was, along with his rule, when it was swept away, so was this security apparatus. Now the democratic president, Roch Kaboré, he was not from a military background at all. The guy who he selected as his minister of defence was in fact a former journalist, not a military person at all either. So as soon as Kaboré came to power, these attacks in Burkina Faso by armed groups linked to Islamic State and Al Qaeda just began to snowball. Really, at first in the north of the country. They took advantage of a lack of development. The north of the country is quite remote, very rural. There's been very little in terms of infrastructure built there. The government always kind of saw it as a place where there weren't many. There wasn't much by way of natural resources or anything, so it wasn't really worth part of the country. And of course, this kind of state of affairs is fertile ground for jihadist groups to start recruiting. There are a lot of people who were angry at the government and had enough of being neglected. So really these attacks started to develop, and armed groups started coming over from Mali, riding into villages, usually on motorbikes. That tends to be the way that the terrorist groups get around in this part of the world. They'd ride into villages, preach in the local mosques, try to implement sort of elements of Sharia law. And Burkina Faso it's 60% Muslim, but the other 40%, are mostly Christians, and then a few sort of animists and so on. So it's not like a fundamentally Muslim country. So it's quite liberal in many ways. People aren't certainly close to sort of living under conditions of Sharia law. So people weren't doing what these terrorists wanted them to, i.e. not drinking alcohol, things like that. Often the armed groups would come into the towns and burn down alcohol shops or brothels, things like that. But culturally, people are, as I say, quite liberal here and so on. It didn't work. I mean, when the terror groups tried to implement these rules, they would come back and threaten them with violence when they weren't followed, and as that would escalate, they would eventually come back and start killing people. I mean, really, the modus operandi of these terror groups in the north of the country and now the east of the country as well is to just ride into these villages and massacre people, for want of a better way of putting it. So yeah, this all started in the north around sort of 2015, 2016, and then by 2019 it had spread to the east of the country. It's now spreading to the south of the country as well. So there's really this kind of bubble in the centre of the country where the capital Ouagadougou and the country's second city, Bobo Dioulasso, are, that is kind of the only properly secure place left in the country now, as these armed groups have kind of slowly taken over the last 6 years. So bringing it a bit closer to the coup, so last year saw two really, really significant events. So the first one was Solhan, which was a massacre of 160 people, at least 160 people. The authorities did make it difficult for journalists to get in there and try to work out exactly how many people had been killed. But at least 160 people were massacred at a artisanal gold mine in the north of the country. So there is quite a lot of gold in Burkina Faso. It is the country's major export. So I'm sure you may well have seen like images of these very informal sort of gold mines in Africa, where really people just kind of rock up and dig holes with hand tools and so on to search for just enough gold to kind of eke out a living. And the jihadists are drawn to these mines in Burkina Faso because they're a source of funding. They can implement a tax on these gold mines. But anyway, this one particular gold mine, it was believed that there was some dispute over who controlled the mine, or who took the kind of protection money for the mine, if you wanted to put it that way. But and they they came into the mine in one night and killed anybody in sight, really. Apparently this attack was also carried out by quite a large number of child soldiers who'd been recruited by the jihadists as well. So so this was the largest single attack that Burkina Faso had seen since its 6-year conflict began, and it really sent sort of shockwaves through the country. I mean, to a degree, I think before that there had always been this kind of sense that the conflict was something that was happening out in the countryside, and the government had done kind of quite a lot as well to kind of maintain these security bubbles around the larger towns and cities and so on. But when Solhan happened, it really changed, I think, the minds of people who hadn't necessarily had first-hand experience of the conflict because they lived in the towns and cities and so on. It really sort of brought it home to them. And then getting even closer to the coup. So in November last year, there was another major attack in the north of the country in a remote military outpost called Inata, where 49 military personnel were killed after a armed group, probably linked to Al-Qaeda, overran the base and again basically massacred the military personnel who were stationed there. So this attack took place. Again, this was the biggest single attack on security forces that had happened in Burkina Faso since the conflict began. But it transpired that 2 weeks later, the base hadn't been supplied with food for 2 weeks. So the soldiers who were stationed there, they'd been having to leave the base to go out and like hunt for food. And again, I mean, this just raised massive questions about how capable the government was in terms of dealing with the security situation. At that point, there were protests. People turned out on the streets of Ouagadougou. The police very quickly. The protests were banned by the government, but people turned out anyway. But within half an hour of people meeting, they were tear gassed. Journalists were tear gassed, myself included. So the government really did everything it could, including shutting down the internet, to try to stop these protests from happening, because they thought that they could indeed sort of lead to a coup. And then shortly after these protests, the president, he sacked a lot of the top military leadership, which was an attempt to try and sort of stave off criticism, but at the same time, it kind of caused quite a lot of bad blood between him and the military, which would later on come back to bite him. And he also sacked his cabinet as well, and had a major reshuffle there. So he bought himself a little bit of time with that, but then about a week before the coup actually happened, there was an alleged foiled coup attempt where 8 members of the military were arrested for apparently plotting to overthrow the president. And then, sure enough, on 23rd, as you say, the mutiny started after weeks really of time. So yeah, that kind of takes us up to the present day. Sorry, that was a super long-winded answer.
No, I mean, you got to remember, this is a place that a lot of people just don't know about, so it's really useful to get your thoughts on it, especially like seeing as you were on the ground. I'm not one of these people that is like, Russia is behind everything. Like, that's such a ridiculous, boring thing we see mostly in US media. However, there were people out in the streets with Russian flags after the coup, and there's quite a lot of talk that Russia has some kind of involvement with the coup plotters and the junta. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all really new at the moment. So Russia has certainly had some interest in Mali over the border, and that's been something that's been brewing for some months or even years. They did Wagner, the private security group with close links to the Kremlin, has deployed in neighbouring Mali in January last month. So yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, there hadn't, leading up to the coup, there hadn't been the same level of interest for Russia in Burkina Faso. We hadn't really seen much by way of Russian interest in Burkina Faso, or people really talking about Russia as a possible international military partner as well. But I do think what happened as soon as the coup happened was that Russia kind of saw it as an opportunity. We did, as you say, see people the day after the coup was confirmed, demonstrations to celebrate the coup, waving Russian flags and so on. How they got those Russian flags is I wouldn't want to speculate there, but I mean, it did seem odd that there were people turning up with those flags. And there was a story in the Daily Beast as well saying that the military commander who took power in Burkina Faso, Paul-Henri Demiba, had persuaded or tried to persuade the former president Kabore to accept military help from Russia twice before the coup actually happened. Now, that story, I mean, it caused quite a big stir. I'm not totally convinced how bona fide that story is. I think it may. The sources aren't really clear in it. I'll say that much.
No, I agree. Daily Beast also as well kind of ranges from really good to really weird articles. You know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it was pretty sensational if it is true, but I'm skeptical as to whether it is, to be honest. But then the other thing which happened was that the day after the coup, or the week that the coup happened, at least the person in charge of training military officers in Central African Republic, which is a country where Russia has been giving military assistance for a long time now, sent an open letter or published an open letter to Burkina Faso saying, basically, if you want help from Russia, we're here to offer it. So I think probably what we're looking at is Russia seeing what's happened in Burkina Faso recently as an opportunity and the beginning of what could turn into a Russian military presence in Burkina Faso, or certainly more Russian influence in Burkina Faso.
Yeah. So it's been what, like 2 or 3 weeks now since this coup. 2 weeks. What's the current situation now on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, the day after the coup, there was a demonstration to celebrate. There were probably 2,000-3,000 people out on the streets that day. Otherwise things on the streets of Ouagadougou have returned to normal. Really, there's not really a larger military presence than you would normally see. The streets are calm, but I mean, obviously the politics of the country are very, very much up in the air. So, as I said, the country. So the guy who led the coup is Paul-Henri Demiba. So he's an infantry commander who wasn't very well known in public, but was quite well known within the military. He's actually written a book last year about how militaries in the Sahel should be responding to the terrorist organizations that are present here, and that kind of gives us some clues as to the direction that he might be taking things in. But I think something that's really important to remember is that they did at the moment they are trying to give the impression that they are willing to work kind of multilaterally with international partners and with kind of power brokers nationally as well. But we saw this in Mali, where the military took over back in 2020, where they sort of paid lip service initially to moving towards elections. They elected selected a civilian transitional president to take them towards elections there. But then last year they actually kicked out that president and just went into full military rule. So Yeah, I dare say what might be happening here in Burkina Faso is that the new military government is trying to buy themselves some time by telling like the ECOWAS, the West African political bloc, that they're willing to work with them and move towards democratic elections, which is what ECOWAS is pushing them for. And yeah, so at the moment it seems like they at least ostensibly are heading in that direction. But I think probably what we're going to see is that these elections don't materialise in good time, and we will start seeing the government start to become more autocratic.
So it doesn't look like there's a real roadmap back to democracy then.
Not at the moment. I mean, they've selected a committee who's going to, I think, select another committee that's actually going to take care of the transition. So, you know, I think they're sort of making noises in that direction, but I dare say it's kind of smoke and mirrors. I think what's happened in Mali is that they've asked for. Well, initially they said they were going to hold elections within 1 year. That's now changed to 5 years, a 5-year transition period.
It's exactly the same thing that happened in Myanmar. You know, the military came and they said, "Yeah, give us a year." Actually, 2, no 3, no 4. Like, yeah, it doesn't look good.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, in Mali, they say they want to stabilise security before they can hold proper democratic elections. And you know, as a result, now that they've asked for this 5-year transition period, they have received sanctions from ECOWAS, the West African political bloc, which is these are recent, and we're sort of yet to see the full effects of them. But I mean, you know, Mali's already one of the poorest countries in the world, and it's obviously going to be the Malian people and the poorest Malian people that suffer the most. And I think you know, we could very easily see things going in the same direction in Burkina Faso. You know, possibly even within this year, I think we could see sanctions. And I think something else we might see as well is although at the moment the government has really got a lot of support. I mean, people I've spoken to who came out onto the streets in 2014 to fight for democracy in this popular uprising, even they now are saying, you know, democracy hasn't worked for us. The security situation hasn't gotten any better. We want to give a military rule a try, and the military junta, I mean, they've got massive public support at the moment, but I think this is probably going to ebb away because I don't really think that the junta is going to be any more capable of sorting out the security problems than the democratic government were. I think the military is so small and so under-resourced, they can't be everywhere at once. And, you know, already the US, which is the largest foreign donor to Burkina Faso, who they also give military aid, so are looking at pulling funding. There's a US law that says that, you know, if a civilian government has been overthrown by undemocratic means, then they're not allowed to give anything but humanitarian aid to such a country. And the other big military partner in Burkina Faso is France, and they offer intelligence and air support to the Burkinabe government. There aren't actually that many troops on the ground in Burkina Faso apart from a special forces unit on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. But in Mali, just going back to Mali as that kind of reference point, which seems to be sort of a year or two ahead of Burkina Faso, perhaps, the French are looking at leaving as the government takes a much more sceptical approach to the international military partners that have been in the region for a few years now. So, you know, if the same thing happens in Burkina Faso, where the junta starts turning away from the military partners that it has at the moment, perhaps more towards Russia. I don't think that's actually going to help the security situation at all. I think it's actually going to make things worse. So I think as it becomes clear the government or the junta isn't going to be able to sort out these security problems, I think that public support is going to fall away pretty quickly. Which again, I think means we could see the junta becoming more autocratic as it tries to hold on to power.
Right, and in terms of the kind of appetite for uprising and what have you, what would you say the country is like there? I really don't know enough about the kind of cultural aspects. Do you think that, that's the sort of thing people might do if they get sick of this? Like, will armed groups form? Are there enough weapons? What's the lay of the land in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, so yes, there is definitely a big culture of protest in Burkina Faso. I mean, as I said, back in 2014, there was the popular uprising which brought democracy to the country. That was led by a civil society group called the Citizens' Broom, which is led by this French Burkinabe rapper called Smokey, and he and the organisation Citizens' Broom. I mean, they're really the ones that got people out onto the street and got rid of this president or dictator who'd been in power for 27 years. And yeah, I mean, the culture's definitely there. That said, I mean, like the Citizens' Broom that played such a big part in 2014 have been totally silent over the last few months as these protests against the former government and insecurity happened. They said they were against them, and I think to a certain degree that the Citizens' Broom kind of saw these protests against the democratic government leading to a coup and the loss of democracy that they had fought for back in 2014. So they've kind of fallen by the wayside a little bit now, and have been replaced by these kind of pro-coup movements. Like the movement to save Burkina Faso is the biggest one. And but although this movement to save Burkina Faso is like very supportive of the coup at the moment and led some ways helped it to get to power, even some people from those movements have said that if they don't see the military sorting out the security problems, then they could take to the streets again. They've already said this. So yeah, I think there definitely could be further uprisings, maybe even further coups. I think it all depends whether or not the junta can deal with the security problems, or if they can't deal with the security problems, how autocratic they're willing to become in order to hold on to power. I mean, it could be that we see protests again in like a year's time, which get sort of brutally suppressed. It wouldn't be a surprise to me. So to your question as to armed groups, I mean, there is already there are already big vigilante groups and militias in Burkina Faso. It's a big part of the security sort of makeup here. So there's the Colguiegos and mostly in the north of the country and east of the country, and the Dozos in the south of the country. So these are groups that have sprung up in parts of the country where there was very little state control, and people, if say somebody had a chicken stolen, for example, you couldn't go to the local police station because the local police station's 30 miles away or whatever. So
right.
You get these guys from your village to kind of dispense some vigilante justice, basically. And these groups have popped up all over Burkina Faso in the last 7 ago, the government actually backed them and started arming and training them. The army and the gendarmerie, there's a French system here where the military is divided up into the army and the gendarmerie, which is like the military police. They weren't able to deal with the security problems themselves, so the government took a really controversial move by passing a law which basically officially recognised these Cogluiegos and Dozos. They tried to say that the law wasn't to do that. They said that they were picking people from outside of these groups to join, but it wasn't actually the case. And yeah, they started training, giving them 14 days training, 10 to 14 days training from the gendarmes, and giving them automatic weapons and sending them out into the countryside with the army. And now they sort of play a role of guides to the military. So the military often come from other parts of the country, whereas Cogluiego and Dozos are local to the area where the army is deployed, and obviously know the terrain and so on. But we're also hearing that although this is kind of diminished in recent months a little bit, but there's a lot of persecution that goes on in Burkina Faso towards the Fulani ethnic group. So the Fulani ethnic group is a group of millions of people found all over West Africa who are traditional herders, so nomadic. And there's a popular misconception here in Burkina Faso that Fulani people are the ones who are carrying out the terrorist attacks. So there's been persecution of Fulani communities, including extrajudicial killings. It seemed of these militias, these government-backed Cogluiegos, at least at the beginning, was that they were the military and the gendarmerie were kind of outsourcing the killing of these Fulani people, the extrajudicial killings of the Fulani people, to these militia groups. Yeah, I mean they've really played, the Cogluiego and the Dozo have really played a big role in the conflict here in Burkina Faso. Probably only going to play an even more extended role, sort of as the new junta tries to beef up security. But I mean the Dozos not the Cogluiegos are more of a kind of recent thing that's only sprung up in the last few years. But the Dozos are these kind of traditional warriors who've been traditional hunters who've been around for decades or possibly even hundreds of years, and they have all these kind of animist beliefs where they, when they go into battle, they wear clothes that are kind of imbued with black magic, and that they think will make bullets fly around them, and they have all these kind of unusual ceremonies as well, which kind of go hand in hand with the fighting. But this is more in the south of the country, where the conflict is just starting to develop, really. But already there, we're starting to see Dozos committing human rights abuses towards the Fulani community in that area of the country as well. So yeah, I mean there's definitely a culture of protest and taking absolutely a culture of these kind of armed groups and vigilantes taking security matters into their own hands as well.
You talk about the Dozo there. How much fighting do they actually do? I mean, I've heard people say, yeah, they're out there fighting the jihadist groups and various other people, but from what I've heard, they don't actually do that much fighting. What's the deal with them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know so much in Burkina Faso. I think at the moment they're not really doing that much fighting, just simply because the conflict in the south of the country is still kind of at the I don't want to say embryonic stage. I mean, it's like, it's definitely happening, but it's still quite small compared to the east and the north of the country. I mean, you find the Dozos in Mali as well, which is less my area of expertise. So I'm not entirely sure how much fighting they do over there. But what I can speak to is the Congregagos, and they do really go to battle with the military, and on a weekly, sometimes almost daily basis, there are reports of Congregagos, being killed or at least involved in battles with the terrorist groups. I mean, I've met many of the Congregagos myself, who have now joined this kind of government-backed militia, and they're definitely out there in the field and are fighting.
In terms of civilians, what's the kind of feeling now? Now that there's been this junta, now that there's a very real possibility of extended fighting again, what's their kind of reaction to all of this? Are they just kind of, right, another bad situation, getting on with it, or what?
No, I don't think so. I think the kind of public opinion towards the junta at the moment is a positive one, and I think
really
people some hope. A phrase that I keep hearing is something had to change. This whole thing that I talked about of there being this kind of security bubbles around the big cities and the towns and so on. You can't really go much further than say 100 kilometers from Ouagadougou without having to risk running into a terrorist checkpoint. The military does have a degree of control out in parts of the countryside and so on, but there are other parts of the countryside where there's none. It's just under terrorist control, and I think people are really, really sick of that. Burkina Faso is not a country that it's had a lot of coups, but it's never really had a war. It's never had a civil war, as many African countries have. And up until 2015, 2016, it was really, it was kind of a beacon of peace in the region. They're just not used to this kind of thing, unlike in some other African countries. So no, I mean the junta has really got broad support at the moment. But like I said before, I think that could disappear really quickly unless the junta is able to sort out the security. But it is the security that is at the heart of things here, and at the heart of why the coup happened, and why the coup has got broad public support at the moment.
Right. And what do you make of this? I've seen some articles recently, and they're like, "Oh, Africa's going through like a coup epidemic." What do you make of all that?
So there does seem to have been a lot of coups in Africa in the last couple of years, especially. I mean, just within the Sahel region, we've had two coups in Mali. There was this military coup where they installed the civilian president, and then we had the coup, what was called the coup within a coup, where the military then threw out the civilian president and took power themselves. Then obviously we had Burkina Faso two weeks ago, and then last week we had the coup in Guinea-Bissau, or attempted coup in Guinea-Bissau, which was not linked to the Sahel conflict. I mean, many people have called Guinea-Bissau a narco state because it has it's a waypoint for drugs coming from South America to travel to Europe, and it's actually understood that the people who attacked the presidential palace in Guinea-Bissau were connected to these drugs gangs that were smuggling substances through to Europe. So it's it's a different kettle of fish over there. But obviously we've had the coup in Sudan as well. Recently we've had a coup in Chad, which is linked to the Sahel conflict after their president was killed in battle. His son took over immediately, which was against the constitution. So yeah, I mean, there does seem to be a very large number of coups when there was a trend towards democracy in Africa. I think to a certain degree, what's happening in Africa is mirroring what's happening in Europe and the West, where there is this kind of turn away from democracy and kind of disappointment with what democracy is able to offer and the promises that it's supposed to make come true. I think we are seeing people turning more towards autocratic ideas about how things should be run. Certainly that's the case in Burkina Faso.
No, I definitely agree. It's like a global trend, and you get these kind of Western think tanks or whatever, or like hyper liberal journalists are like, wow, it's so crazy that this is happening in Africa. It's like, mate, this is happening in Europe as well. It's just not at the level of instability yet where coups are happening. But no, I agree completely. This is like an endemic situation globally. And then people are trying to act like, wow, Africa's crazy. Like, no, it's a lot more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely true. I mean, there's people here in Burkina Faso. They have the internet on their phones now. They're able to see what's going on in the West. They're able to see what's going on at home more easily as well. Everything is there's sort of global problems that are happening all over the world, not just in Africa, are clear to them. And they're skeptical about democracy. Like I say, I've been really surprised by how many people I've spoken to, how many Burkinabes I've spoken to since the coup, who just say that democracy wasn't working and don't seem to be particularly interested in seeing it come back either.
That is, I think that's a reality a lot of people in the West aren't ready for yet. In terms of Burkina Faso, is there anything else you think our listeners should know about before we go?
Yeah, so I mean, Burkina Faso it's a country in West Africa. It's landlocked on its kind of southern borders. It's got the kind of West African coastal states like Ivory Coast, Ghana, Benin, Togo. Then to its east, it's got Niger, where this conflict is between armed groups and the link to Islamic State and Al Qaeda is happening as well. And Mali, really, the Western Sahel conflict, which Burkina Faso is a part of, is really focused on these three countries, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, and especially the tri-border region where the borders of those three countries meet. So I mean, Burkina Faso is one of the poorest countries in the world. It's a very young country as well. Like the median age here is just under 18. So like a lot of Africa, people here are young and want to see a better future for themselves. So in terms of its history, it used to be called Upper Volta, so it's the former French colony. And then it had its name changed in the 80s by probably the most famous Burkinabe person that there is, Thomas Sankara. So Thomas Sankara is a really interesting character. He's kind of like the Che Guevara. He's often called the Che Guevara of Africa. So he, certainly dressed the part, wearing like a red beret with a big gold star and sort of military fatigue. So, was taking some notes from Che Guevara there, and also was very anti-French, or certainly very anti neo-colonialism. I mean, Burkina Faso became independent in the 60s, but France, the way France left Africa after colonialism just wasn't the same as the UK or other sort of European countries that had colonized parts of Africa, a lot of people stayed, and a lot of the business interests stayed, and France really kept a kind of hold on the former African colonies in a way that other former colonial powers just didn't. So Thomas Sankara was kind of a figurehead for this, really, and tried to implement a lot of policies that kind of promoted self-sufficiency and kind of moving away from France kind of socialist policies as well. So that kind of culture, it still pervades here in Burkina Faso. People are very kind of anti-French. They have a very strong sense of their own independence. Burkina Faso actually means the land of the upright people, like the incorruptible people, and people, they really take that to heart here. And they're very honest and open and upstanding. And anti-French. So yeah, it's
really.
Yeah. So that's always kind of, from a security point of view, though, it's always made the fact that France is the big military partner here, a bit problematic. The government has, I think, taken the approach that it needs the help of France to fight this conflict that it's got going on. But publicly, it's always been very difficult for them to say that because the general population don't really like it. I think something else that's worth noting is that this conflict in the Sahel, in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, can also be traced back to the conflict in Libya. So when Gaddafi was removed and instability started to prevail throughout Libya, that then began to spread down into Mali, as did a lot of the weapons as well that are being used in the Sahel conflict have all come from Mali, which have gone to these armed groups which are riding around on motorbikes or massacring people now. So yeah, it's definitely been a kind of a chain reaction from the whole sort of West removal of Gaddafi from Libya.
Yeah, no, totally. That was really useful, mate. Thank you very, very much. Where can people find out more if they want to find your work, talk to you about the situation?
Yeah, just look me up on Twitter, and yeah, you can catch my website as well. Just Google Burkina Faso, I guess, and see what you can find out about the country. As I say, it's not a place that most people have even heard of, let alone know anything about. So yeah, just take a look, and because I really think what's going on here, it's the Sahel conflict. I mean, a lot of people are calling it the next sort of major battleground for ISIS and Al Qaeda and so on. And as the security situation deteriorates here, I think we are going to see the Sahel becoming more and more of a. I think we're going to start seeing more and more about the Sahel in the news over the coming years.
Yeah, I think you're right. And your Twitter, it's at Henry_Wilkins, right?
Yeah, that's the one.
Brilliant. Okay, mate. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
Okay. Cheers, Jake. Thank you.
Cheers, mate. That was journalist Henry Wilkins talking about the recent military coup in Burkina Faso and what that might mean for the future of the conflict in the region. Definitely follow what Henry is doing. He's going into very, very deep detail on a region that is very rarely reported on like that. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/popularfront. If you subscribe, you get a lot more content for your money, bonus episodes, extra video content, early episodes, narrated articles, various different journalism series that we've built. Check it out, patreon.com/popularfront. Remember, we are 100% grassroots. We do not accept corporate investment, and we do not accept advertising from any dodgy places. Patreon.com/popularfront is how we keep going. Thank you to our sponsors on this episode. They are Propagandopolis, an outlet selling and writing about historical conflict propaganda from around the world. Buy prints at propagandopolis.com. Use the promo code POPULARFRONT10 for 10% off. Also, thank you to Oracle Coffee Shop in Portland, Oregon, USA. They're an independent coffee business selling only fair trade products. See them at 3875 Southwest Bond Avenue, 97239. Also, thank you to Grindcore House, a pair of independent coffee shops in Philadelphia, USA, one in South, one in West. Find them on socials at Grindcore House. Tell them Popular Front sent you. Thank you very much to those sponsors. Like I said, we only deal with ethical companies, people that don't fuck their workers over. So if you want to sponsor some episodes of Popular Front, hit me up, Jake at h11.tv, email, check that out. Watch our documentaries at youtube.com/popularfront. We're very close to 100,000 subscribers, so if you're already subscribing, thank you very much. If not, please get on it, subscribe to it. We've got a lot more coming very soon. youtube.com/popularfront. If you want to keep up to date with the various going-ons regarding war and conflict around the world, follow us on Instagram at popular.front or Twitter at popularfront_. You can buy our merchandise, t-shirts, hats, all sorts of stuff at popularfront.shop. And if you're one of the Patreons, you will see there's a discount code option at the top of the screen. You can enter discount codes for every bit of merch there is. www.popularfront.shop. Music in this episode, the intro was made by Home, and the outro music, as always, was made by my friend and Popular Front OG team member, Sam Black. You can hear his music at samblackpf.com. Now, I just want to say thank you very much to the high tier Patreons. Without these people, this whole project would fall on its ass, basically. So thank you very much to Chris Kanovich, NTHG845829, Ethan Zwick, Skeleton Problems, Champagne Anarchist, Watt, Elise Middlefart, Lewis, David McManus, Joaquim Williamson Holt, Udoye Travis, Tom Petrie, James Leons, Kate, Lisa Milgram, Bradley Davies, Brendan Crave, Drift, Pete Hesher, RX, Travis Lieberman, Cherry, Ben Marshall, Dallas Dunn, LD50 Seattle, K Glitter Vulcan, Meredith Waters, Bethany Swoveland, Adam H, Carante, Bjorn Kirsten, Diamond Steen, Michael O'Connor, Zach Picard, Todd Cravens, Nicholas Butter, JD, Jav, Ian Froese, James Cully, Tynan Daly, Ethan, Shanklin the Painter, Fitz Madrid, Ed Coulthard, Mike Barone, Liam Williams, Wizard of Woz, Degenerate Zero Alpha, Giorgio Arani, DR, Trey Nance, Amy R, Rubicon, Frank Austin, Amelia Me, Nawaiz, Nate Van Dor, Christina Rivetti, Freya Northman, Noah, Andrew Hurley, Vida Provost, Brian McLaughlin, Tom Lochrin, Young Wasabi, Tony Bin, Adam Bergsnyder, JL, Stephen Davila, Anthony Kabarak, Dan Dunham, Fletcher, Diana Gorvanek, Lawrence Abrahams, Peter McCormick from What Bitcoin Did, Christopher Martin, Ryan Sandercock, and Maurice Zumbul. Thank you all so much. Without you, this project would not be carrying on the way it is. Much appreciated. If people want to support us, go to patreon.com/popularfront, or you can go to popularfront.co/support.